Imagine waking up in a world where every aspect of your life, what you wear, when you sleep, what you eat, how you play, who you love, and even where you answer nature's call, is dictated by laws that range from sensible to downright absurd. There is no concept of personal freedom as you know it. Instead, there is a dense web of edicts handed down by kings, lords, bishops, and guildmasters. Some of these laws are designed to keep the peace or protect people from danger. Many of them are designed to preserve power and social hierarchy. Others are so bizarre that they seem to exist simply to amuse the people who enforce them. This is the legal landscape of medieval Europe. Tonight, you will wander through it not as a historian reading dusty statutes, but as a person living under their weight. You will feel the tug of a too-short curfew, the itch of coarse cloth mandated by class, the embarrassment of a public punishment for a crime you didn't know existed, and you will laugh, because sometimes, when faced with a law that prohibits shoes with long toes, what else can you do but chuckle? You are a humble clothier in a small medieval town. Your days are spent dyeing wool and weaving fabric, but your personal wardrobe is meager, plain tunics of undyed wool and a single cloak. Today you overhear a proclamation being read in the marketplace. The Lord's steward unfurls a scroll and, in a nasally voice, announces new sumptuary laws. These laws regulate what people can wear based on their social status. As a commoner, you must not wear silks, velvets, or sable fur. Only those of noble birth may don such luxuries. The color purple is expressly reserved for royalty. If you dare to wear boots with too long a point, you'll be fined. You glance down at your own turnshoes, sturdy, practical, and blissfully within the law. You think of your cousin, who once tried to pass off a second-hand velvet doublet as his own, and ended up scrubbing the Lord's latrines for a fortnight as punishment. Over the next few weeks, enforcement of the sumptuary laws grows comically strict. A young carpenter is dragged before the court for wearing a hat with a feather longer than the breadth of his hand. He pleads ignorance, but the bailiff holds up a wooden ruler and measures the offending plume. He is fined and made to pluck out the feather, to the amusement of the crowd. A woman who sold goose feathers for pillow stuffing is accused of impersonating nobility because she lined her cloak with marten fur. She claims it was rabbit. A panel of fur experts is convened, and after much stroking and sniffing, they declare it to be weasel. She is fined anyway. You begin to check your own clothes obsessively before leaving the house. Are your sleeves too wide? Is the hood of your cloak too pointed? You decide to err on the side of drabness. Better to be thought poor than to run afoul of the fashion police. There are deeper reasons behind these laws. The lords fear that if commoners dress like nobles, social distinctions will blur. They worry that a peasant in a silk gown might start to think of herself as equal to a baron's daughter. They also want to preserve their monopoly on certain dyes and materials, which are expensive and imported. Woad and madder are allowed for commoners, but Tyrian purple and scarlet are off-limits. Leather shoes are fine, but shoes with poulaines, long beak-like toes that curl up, are restricted to those with wealth. Some towns even specify how many inches a person's shoe toe may extend based on their rank. A knight may have a shoe point of 2 inches. A duke may flaunt 6. Rumor has it that a particularly vain countess once wore poulaines so long that she had to tie the tips to her garters to walk. She tripped going up the church steps and landed in the baptismal font. The priest declared it a sign of divine judgment against vanity. As a clothier, you understand how clothing conveys status. When a merchant commissions you to sew a cloak lined with squirrel fur, you know it will announce his prosperity. When a widow orders a dark wool gown for mourning, you know it will signal her piety. The sumptuary laws codify these signals into law. They also create opportunities for creativity within constraint. People begin to incorporate forbidden colors in subtle ways, lining their sleeves with a strip of red, embroidering a hidden pattern inside their collars. You find yourself complicit in a small rebellion. Late one evening, the baker's wife knocks on your door. She whispers that she wants a pair of yellow hose. But yellow is for courtesans, you protest. She grins. Exactly. My husband will think me scandalous. You make them anyway, smirking at the thought of the baker's reaction. Laws can dictate what you wear, but they cannot dictate how you feel about it. Later, as dusk falls, the church bell tolls 8 times. This is not just a call to prayer, it's the curfew bell. By law, all fires must be covered or extinguished. Businesses must close, and honest folk should be indoors. The risk of fire is ever present in a town of wooden houses with thatched roofs. If a blaze starts at night, it can spread uncontrollably. Anyone found walking the streets after curfew without a lantern or legitimate reason will be taken in by the night watch and may spend the night in the stocks. You think of your neighbor who was caught returning from an illicit tryst without a candle. He sat in the stocks until morning while people threw turnips at him. You make sure to bank your fire safely, place a cover over the embers, and double-check that the door bar is secured before slipping under your blanket. You listen to the muffled sounds of the night watch's footsteps and the occasional distant shout of "all's well." The curfew bell is both a safety measure and a tool of control. It prevents thieves from prowling under cover of darkness, but it also keeps villagers from gathering after hours to gossip or plot. The night watchmen are a motley crew. Retired soldiers with crooked noses, younger sons of merchants eager to curry favor with the Lord, and occasionally a tanner whose sense of smell has long since deserted him. They carry staves and horns. They check that candles are snuffed, shutters are closed, and pigs are in their pens. They shout if they see smoke rising from a chimney, and bang on doors if they hear laughter after curfew. Sometimes they abuse their power, extorting a coin from lovers caught canoodling in an alley. More often, they are simply bored. One night, you hear 2 watchmen arguing about whose wife makes the best pottage. Their voices carry through the still air. You chuckle and pull your blanket tighter. There are exceptions to the curfew. Midwives may be summoned at any hour. Bakers may stoke their ovens in the early hours to provide bread for morning. Travelers arriving late may seek lodging with permission. Yet even the exceptions are controlled. A traveler must carry a sealed letter from his lord or risk arrest. A baker must have his oven inspected for safety. You remember the great fire in a neighboring town that started when a baker's apprentice forgot to rake the embers. The flames leapt from roof to roof, consuming houses, barns, and the church. In the aftermath, the king issued a proclamation requiring bakers to build their ovens in stone sheds away from other buildings. The curfew law was tightened. You grumbled about it at first. No more late-night song around the hearth, but you also understand the devastation fire can bring. Sometimes, despite the curfew, the night is alive. On certain feast days, the bell is ignored. On Midsummer's Eve, people light bonfires and dance until dawn. On the eve of a saint's day, musicians play long after the watchmen have given up enforcing the rules. There is an unspoken understanding that life cannot be all work and no play. You have snuck out past curfew more than once, a lantern hidden under your cloak, your heart pounding as you crept past the snoozing watchman, the thrill of being out under the moon, the whisper of the wind in the trees, the soft murmur of fellow lawbreakers. It is intoxicating in its own right. You know you are taking a risk. If caught, you might spend a night in the pillory with your ears nailed, or be fined a month's wages. But sometimes, a little rebellion is worth the price. The next day, the ale conner arrives. He is an official tasked with ensuring that the town's ale is of the proper strength and sold at a fair price. He dips a piece of bread into each brewer's batch. If he can sit on a bench soaked with ale, without his leather trousers sticking, the ale is deemed acceptable. It's a silly test, but it deters unscrupulous brewers from watering down their product. Similarly, the weight of bread is regulated under the Assize of bread. Bakers must sell loaves of a set size and weight relative to the current price of grain. If the harvest is poor and grain expensive, the loaves shrink. If grain is abundant, the loaves grow. You recall the case of a baker who tried to sell underweight bread. He was paraded through town with a loaf hung around his neck while the crowd jeered. To avoid this, bakers sometimes add a baker's dozen, an extra loaf, to orders as insurance against accusations of shorting customers. You admire the logic. Feed people fairly and punish those who exploit hunger. The Assize of bread and ale is one of the earliest consumer protection laws, but it can feel intrusive. One morning you watch as the ale conner inspects your neighbor's brew. She's a widow who supports her family by selling ale from her kitchen. He declares her batch too weak and dumps it onto the ground. She protests that she had no choice. Her barley supply was poor. He shrugs and moves on. Later she tells you she will add a handful of herbs to give it more body. If the ale conner's trousers stick, she confides, I'll blame the honey. You laugh and agree not to tell. Another time, the miller's wife is fined for selling bread that is an ounce under the required weight. She claims the scales were off. The reeve orders her scales confiscated and replaced. For weeks, she mutters under her breath every time she slices bread, measuring each loaf as if it were gold. There is a folk wisdom about the Assize. Children recite rhymes about the weight of bread. When wheat is at 12, loaves weigh 6. When wheat is at 20, bakers learn tricks. You have learned to read the grain market like a weather vane. You know that a rain-soaked harvest means smaller loaves and leaner bellies. You know that a bumper crop means feasts, and perhaps a new cloak. The ale conner and the bread weigher are part of this delicate balance. They are not always fair, but they are necessary. Without regulation, a brewer might stretch a barrel of ale into two by adding river water, and a baker might hollow out loaves to make them appear larger. With regulation, there is at least a standard, however imperfect. You still grumble when the price of ale rises, but you also appreciate that the brew in your mug won't make you sick. One afternoon, you witness a trial unlike any other. The defendant is a sow. She stands in the dock, snuffling and unaware of her predicament. She allegedly ate a child's shoe and therefore faces charges of theft. The judge presides solemnly, and a clerk reads out the accusation. Witnesses testify. There aren't many, because few people think to watch pigs' eating habits, and the sow's owner pleads for mercy. Animal trials are not uncommon. If a pig kills a child, it might be hanged. If a rooster crows at the wrong time, it might be accused of being in league with the devil and burned. There's even a law in some regions that if a swarm of locusts devastates crops, the bishop can excommunicate them. You suppress a laugh as the sow is sentenced to a light beating and returned to her sty. The spectacle is both absurd and a way for human communities to impose order on chaos. If even animals are subject to law, then the law feels omnipresent. The rituals surrounding animal trials are elaborate. When a pig is accused of murder, it is dressed in a little jacket and cap and led to court by the bailiff. An advocate is appointed to defend it. The trial is conducted with all the seriousness of a human case. The verdict is proclaimed aloud. If found guilty, the animal is executed in public. People gather to watch, both horrified and amused. Children mimic the proceedings with their dolls. Adults gossip about whether the pig understood its crime. The underlying logic is that animals, like people, live within the moral order. If they violate it, they must be punished to restore balance. Yet the punishments are often symbolic. A rooster burned for crowing at the wrong time will not prevent other roosters from crowing. A sow whipped for eating a shoe will still root around for scraps. The true purpose is to reassert human control over a world that often seems unpredictable. It's not just farm animals. Insects, too, can find themselves in the dock. When caterpillars devour a vineyard, the local priest might issue a formal excommunication. He will sprinkle holy water around the vines and command the insects to depart. If they persist, he may call a synod to discuss the matter, sending letters to the bishop seeking guidance. There is a famous case of weevils being given a tiny plot of land as compensation for being asked to leave a farmer's crops. Rats, being cunning and elusive, rarely show up for their trials. In such cases, the court proceeds in absentia, pronouncing judgment and hoping the rodents get the message. You think of the rats in your own house and wonder if they would heed a summons. Probably not. You set another trap and hope for the best. In another bizarre legal practice, guilt or innocence can be determined by ordeal. You have heard of people accused of theft who must carry a red-hot iron a set distance. If their hands heal cleanly after 3 days, they are innocent. If the wounds fester, they are guilty. There is the ordeal of water. The accused is bound and tossed into a river or pond. If they sink, the water accepts them, and they are innocent, though they often drown. If they float, they are guilty and will be executed. Wives accused of adultery may be forced to walk barefoot over hot plowshares. It seems cruel and arbitrary, but in a world where truth is sometimes unknowable, ordeal is seen as a way to let divine judgment decide. You shudder at the thought of entrusting your fate to burning iron. You know that in recent years ordeals have fallen out of favor in some places, replaced by juries of peers, but the stories persist. Justice in your time can be as much superstition as law. You have a friend, a cobbler named Will, who was once accused of stealing a goose. The goose had gone missing from the Lord's kitchen, and suspicion fell on the tradesman who had been in and out that day. Will protested his innocence. The steward insisted on an ordeal by water. A crowd gathered by the pond. Will was bound and thrown in. He sank like a stone. Men with poles pulled him out just before he drowned. He was declared innocent, though he coughed up pond water for days. The real thief, an urchin who confessed after seeing Will nearly die, was put in the stocks and pelted with rotten eggs. You were relieved for Will, but you also vowed never to go near that pond again. There are other forms of trial. Trial by combat allows 2 parties to settle a dispute by fighting. If one yields or dies, the other is deemed right. In theory, the strongest fighter could win, even if he is lying. But people believe God will protect the innocent. You have witnessed a case where 2 neighbors quarreled over a pig that wandered between their properties. They agreed to a duel with quarterstaves. After several blows, one man slipped in the mud and landed face first in a dung heap. The other claimed victory. The priest declared it God's will. The loser paid a fine and gave up the pig. He also spent a week scraping manure off his tunic. You wondered if God had a sense of humor. As irrational as ordeals seem, they serve a purpose in a society where evidence is hard to gather. There are no fingerprints, no forensic labs, no reliable written records. People rely on oaths and reputations. If a man is known to be honest, his word counts. If he is known to be a liar, he may need oath helpers, people who swear on his behalf, to bolster his claim. The ordeal is a last resort when oaths and reputations fail. You hope never to face one. You also hope that future generations will look back on them with the same baffled amusement you feel. Maybe they will have courts with impartial judges and rules of evidence. Maybe they will laugh at the idea that God decides guilt based on whether you can float. Medieval laws extend into your kitchen and hunting grounds. On Fridays and during Lent, you are forbidden to eat meat by ecclesiastical law. You stick to fish and eggs. There are also laws governing what fish you can catch. Only nobility may set nets in the Lord's river. Peasants may fish with a line and hook, but face heavy fines if caught with nets. Poaching deer in the royal forest is punishable by mutilation or death. Deer are the king's property. You recall a man named Hugh who snared a rabbit on the Lord's land because his children were starving. He was caught and had his ears cut off. You learn to forage mushrooms, berries, and nuts to supplement your diet. Even baking pies has rules. Certain ingredients are reserved for the wealthy. You find it amusing and frustrating that lawmakers concern themselves with what you put in your mouth. The list of forbidden foods and permitted preparations is long. Eels from the Lord's pond must be split with him. You may keep every third eel you catch. Oysters are free for all, but lobsters belong to the abbey. On fast days you may eat beaver tail because, according to one ecclesiastical authority, it tastes like fish. Geese stuffed with garlic are reserved for Michaelmas. Hedgehogs may only be cooked at harvest time. There is even a statute about the selling of pies. Gooseberry pies must contain at least 8 berries. Meat pies must not include organs unless they are marked as such. The pie assizer arrives once a month to cut into pies and inspect their contents. If he finds a lark baked into a pie meant to be pigeon, the baker is fined. You didn't know there was a difference. You decide to stick to pottage. Fishing laws are particularly onerous. The Lord's bailiff patrols the banks of the river with a keen eye for nets and weirs. He confiscates any net he sees and fines the owner. Once, you are caught with a basket of trout. You explain that you caught them with a hook, but the bailiff insists you owe the Lord 2 of the fish. You hand them over reluctantly. Later, you learn to use a technique called tickling, running your fingers under the belly of a fish to coax it into your hands. It's not illegal because there is no net. It's also more fun. You and your friends sneak down to the stream at dusk, roll up your sleeves, and wiggle your fingers under stones. When you catch a fish, you stifle a giggle. It feels like a small triumph over an unfair law. Forests are off-limits, except for gleaning wood for fuel and gathering nuts. Deer are strictly protected. Pigs may forage for acorns only if you pay a pannage fee. If your pig is caught without a bell around its neck, you pay a fine. Bees belong to whoever owns the tree they nest in, unless the swarm takes to the air, in which case it is fair game. There are laws governing the hunting of hares, the snaring of birds, the picking of wild strawberries. You joke that soon they will charge for rainwater. Your neighbor jokes that they already do. It's called a tithe. Your love life is also subject to regulation. If you wish to marry someone from another village, you must obtain permission from your lord or risk paying a fine. Marriage without the Lord's consent could mean you lose your right to live on his land. Adultery is punished differently for men and women. A married woman caught with a lover may be paraded through the town with her head shaved, while a man might receive a fine. There are bedding witnesses whose job it is to watch newlyweds consummate their marriage to ensure that it is valid. Midwives sometimes inspect a bride to confirm her virginity. There are also laws about when you may have relations with your spouse. Not on holy days, not during certain fasts, not on Sundays. The Church hands out penitential manuals, listing the number of days of fasting required as penance for specific sexual acts. You find the idea of anyone telling you what you can do in your own bed laughable, yet you follow the rules to avoid scandal and maintain your standing. Betrothal is legally binding. If you promise to marry someone in front of witnesses, you cannot easily break that promise. Handfasting, a ceremony where couples join hands and declare their union, creates a marriage as valid as one performed in a church. The Church would prefer all marriages be solemnized before an altar, but it recognizes handfasting out of necessity. Bans must be read in church for 3 consecutive Sundays to allow anyone with objections to speak. If you are related within the forbidden degrees of kinship, 7 generations in some cases, you must seek a dispensation. These rules exist to prevent incest and to ensure that property remains within appropriate lines of inheritance. They also create opportunities for mischief. A man once objected to a marriage, claiming the bride and groom were third cousins. They were not. He simply wanted the bride for himself. The priest threw him out. The Church's moral code extends beyond marriage. Laws against fornication, concubinage, and sodomy carry severe penalties. The punishments range from fines and penance to flogging and execution. Some towns employ scold's bridles, iron cages placed on the heads of women accused of gossiping or nagging. The device forces a metal bit into the mouth to prevent speech. The woman is paraded through the streets as a warning. Men, too, can be punished for being idle drunkards or lecherous knaves. There is a stool called the ducking stool, used to punish women accused of being scolds or of selling weak ale. The accused is tied to a chair, and dunked in a pond repeatedly. On one occasion, a man was strapped to the ducking stool for beating his wife. The crowd cheered. Despite the rules, people find ways to love and to lust. Lovers meet in barns, under bridges, and in hedgerows. A wink at market can lead to a whispered rendezvous behind the mill. Midwives turn a blind eye to children born too early after a wedding. The parish clerk pretends not to see two hands clasp in the pew. Life pushes against the boundaries of the law. You learn to navigate it with discretion and humor. When your friend asks you to stand as a witness to his betrothal, you do so with joy. When the priest warns against dancing on holy days, you dance anyway. But you do it in the forest, away from prying eyes. The laws are there, but so is human nature. Your work and livelihood are also governed by a web of rules created by guilds and councils. As a clothier, you belong to the Weavers' Guild. This membership grants you certain privileges: the right to sell your cloth at market, the right to train apprentices, and the right to be protected from unfair competition. It also binds you to obligations. You must not weave cloth outside the set widths and lengths decreed by the guild. You must not use inferior thread or dyes. You must pay dues and contribute to the guild's feast day celebrations. If you violate these rules, you can be fined, have your loom confiscated, or be expelled. Without guild membership, you cannot legally trade in the town. You cannot even set up your loom without permission. You recall an old woman who set up a spinning wheel in her cottage to make a little extra money. The guild forced her to stop. "Protecting our members," they said. Markets are regulated to the minute. Market days are fixed. No one may sell goods outside of them. Prices for bread, ale, meat, and cloth are posted on a board. Haggling is permitted within reason, but price fixing is punishable. Stall locations are assigned by the market steward. If you set up in someone else's spot, you will be moved. Foreign merchants, those from other towns, must pay a toll to sell. They may not undercut local prices. They must stay in approved lodgings. If they fail to comply, their goods may be confiscated. At the same time, the market provides opportunities for exchange and excitement. You like to wander among the stalls, smelling spices from the east, admiring furs from the north, fingering ribbons from Flanders. You also know to keep an eye out for the market cross, where announcements and punishments are carried out. It's hard to enjoy haggling over a bolt of linen when a thief is being whipped 20 feet away. Guilds organize more than trade. They are social networks. They sponsor pageants and feasts, care for members in times of illness, and provide dowries for daughters. They also police morality within their ranks. A cooper caught using rotten staves will be disciplined by his brethren. A tailor who works on Sunday may be fined and required to attend extra mass. Apprentices who brawl in taverns risk being expelled. There is a hierarchy within each guild: master, journeyman, apprentice. To become a master, you must produce a masterpiece and be approved by your peers. Nepotism is rampant. Families control guilds for generations. If you are an outsider, it is nearly impossible to break in. The guilds argue that they maintain quality and protect consumers. You see their point, but you also see the closed circles they create. When your son expresses interest in becoming a blacksmith, you begin saving to pay the exorbitant apprenticeship fee. Life is not all work and rules. There is play, and naturally, there are laws about that too. Football, as you know it, is a chaotic free-for-all, played in fields and streets with an inflated pig's bladder. It involves entire villages kicking, throwing, and punching their way toward a goal, which may be a tree or a church door. It is loud, muddy, and occasionally deadly. The king has banned it multiple times because it distracts men from archery practice and leads to injuries. You still play. When the bailiff appears, you pretend to be on your way to church. He pretends to believe you. Dice games and card games are also regulated. Gambling is frowned upon. If you are caught playing dice during working hours, you might be fined or have your dice burned. If you gamble away your tools, the guild will not help you replace them. You have seen a man lose his shoes in a game of hazard and walk home barefoot through the snow. Archery is one activity that is not only permitted but required. The king wants his yeomen proficient with the longbow, the weapon that has won wars. On Sundays after Mass, the constable sets up targets in the field, and men are expected to practice. There are laws mandating that every man own a bow and a certain number of arrows. If you show up without your bow, you are fined. If you are caught playing football instead of practicing archery, you may be whipped. You enjoy archery practice. It is a break from work. It is also a source of pride. When you hit the center of the target, you stand a little taller. You think of the battles your father fought and how the longbow turned the tide. You also think of your neighbor, who once loosed an arrow too early and skewered a goose. He claimed it was practice for dinner. There are laws about tournaments and jousts. Only nobles may joust. A commoner may not challenge a knight. You once watched a joust from behind a fence. Two armored men charged at each other with lances. One was unhorsed and landed with a thud. The crowd cheered. Later, at the tavern, you tried jousting with broomsticks. You ended up with a bruised rib and a scolding from your wife. There are also laws about bear baiting, cockfighting, and bull running. These entertainments are popular, but they attract rowdy crowds. The town council decrees that bear baiting may only occur on certain days and must not interrupt church services. Cockfighting must not take place within sight of the convent. Bull running is banned near market stalls. You wonder if there is any aspect of life that the law hasn't touched. Travel in medieval Europe is not as simple as picking a destination and setting off. Roads are rough, bridges are scarce, and laws regulate your movement. As a villain, an unfree tenant, you must have your lord's permission to leave the manor. If you wish to visit your cousin in the next village, you must ask. If you leave without permission and are caught, you can be fined or forced back. Merchants and pilgrims carry letters of safe conduct bearing seals and signatures. Without such documents, they risk being accused of vagrancy or worse. You have seen men stopped at the town gate and asked to produce their pass. Those without one are turned away or thrown in the pillory. Bridges are expensive to build and maintain. To raise funds, lords levy bridge tolls. A penny for a man on foot, 2 for a horse and cart, more for a herd of sheep. At first you grumble at the fee. Then you think of the time your neighbor's ox cart was swept away, trying to ford the river. You decide the toll is worth it. When a bridge is built, it sometimes falls under the care of a religious guild. The bridge wardens collect tolls and use them to repair the structure and to light lamps along the length at night. If you are caught trying to sneak across without paying, you may be made to stand on the bridge all day with a sign around your neck proclaiming you a thief. There are similar tolls for roads called pavage, to fund the laying of stone. Mirage taxes fund town walls. You joke that there is a tax for everything except breathing. Your friend jokes that it's only a matter of time. There are laws about who may stay at an inn and for how long. An innkeeper must record the names of strangers and the reason for their travel. If a traveler dies on his property, the innkeeper may be liable for the goods left behind. He must also keep a good fire burning, provide ale of proper strength, and serve food at regulated prices. If he allows gambling or prostitution, he can be shut down. You like the inn for its hearth and its gossip. You also like the innkeeper's daughter. You flirt with her under the guise of asking for more ale. She smiles and tells you that the law prohibits free refills. The Black Death has swept through the land more than once, and with it has come a flurry of new laws aimed at public health. Some of these laws make sense. Others are desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable. Town councils order butchers and tanners to move their operations outside the walls to reduce foul smells and contamination. They ban the dumping of waste into the main street. They require that latrines be dug a certain distance from wells. Anyone caught throwing slops out of an upper window without shouting a warning is fined. You remember a time when someone failed to shout. A passerby was doused in the contents of a chamber pot. He sued. The offender was made to stand under a bucket of fish heads in the market, while the victim poured slops over him. Justice can be messy. During plague outbreaks, laws become harsher. Quarantine measures are imposed. Houses with sick people are marked with a red cross and the words, "God have mercy." Family members are forbidden to leave. Markets are canceled. Travelers are turned away. Rumors spread that cats and dogs carry the disease. Councils order that stray animals be killed. Some towns decree that all pigs must be kept behind fences. Others burn barrels of herbs in the streets, believing the smoke will purify the air. Physicians recommend that people avoid bathing because they believe hot water opens the pores to miasmas. This contradicts laws in some regions that mandate communal bathhouse attendance to maintain hygiene. You are caught between conflicting edicts and conflicting theories. You decide to wash discreetly in the river and burn rosemary in your cottage, just in case. Sanitation laws extend to personal grooming. At one point, a town in Italy banned beards because lice were thought to hide in them. Another town required that women cover their hair to prevent the spread of fleas. In your village, the council passes an ordinance that all barbers must dispose of hair clippings outside the town to prevent vermin. The barber grumbles but complies. You sit in his chair and feel a small thrill as he scrapes away the stubble on your chin. You wonder if a clean face will keep the plague away. You decide it can't hurt. Public health is in its infancy. But people are trying. Some of the measures are laughable. Some, like moving slaughterhouses, make the air easier to breathe. You are grateful for any law that makes your town smell less like a privy. Women exist under a double set of expectations, the secular law and the church's moral code. Women may not own property independently unless they are widows. They may not inherit land if they have brothers. They may not testify in court unless the matter concerns another woman or a child. They may be charged with witchcraft for a variety of reasons: brewing herbs, aiding births, keeping cats, having too much knowledge of healing. Your neighbor, Agnes, is a midwife. She is skilled and kind. When a baby is born healthy, she praises God. When a baby dies, some whisper that she has angered a spirit. One day, a child is stillborn. The grieving father, unable to accept fate, accuses Agnes of witchcraft. The bailiff arrests her. She is locked in a cold cell, while a panel of men, none with medical knowledge, decides whether she consorted with the devil. The witchcraft laws are vague and frightening. They allow for the prosecution of any behavior that deviates from the norm. Does a woman talk too loudly in church? She might be a witch. Does she live alone at the edge of the forest? She might be a witch. Does her cow give more milk than others? Witch. The punishments range from fines to flogging to execution by hanging or burning. Witches are said to float in water, like the guilty in the ordeal. If accused, you might be bound and thrown into a pond. If you sink, you drown but are innocent. If you float, you are guilty and will be executed. It is a no-win situation. You are careful not to anger your neighbors. You also quietly support Agnes. When she is finally released, thanks to the intervention of the Lord's wife who values her skills, you bring her a loaf of bread and a jar of honey. Not all accusations lead to trials. There is the punishment of the cucking stool, used primarily for women accused of being common scolds. A scold is a woman who argues with her husband or neighbors. The accused is tied to a chair and ducked into water repeatedly. Men, too, can be ducked for disruptive behavior, but it is rarer. The law is a tool to silence women. You recall a day when a fishmonger's wife criticized the reeve for mismeasuring her fish. He accused her of scolding. She was tied to the stool and dunked. People laughed. You felt uneasy. Later, the fishmonger's wife continued to speak her mind. Laws can punish, but they rarely silence truth completely. Money or the lack thereof, is a constant concern. Medieval authorities love to tax. There is the tithe, 1/10 of your produce or earnings, which goes to the church. There is tallage, an arbitrary tax levied by the Lord whenever he needs money, perhaps for a feast or a war. There is the hearth tax, where you pay based on the number of hearths in your house. The bailiff counts them and marks your door. If you brick up a fireplace to avoid the tax, you risk suffocating your family. There are bridge tolls and road tolls and market stall fees. There is a fee to use the Lord's mill, the Lord's oven, the Lord's winepress. You joke that there is a tax for the air you breathe. Your friend counters that if the Lord could find a way to bottle it, he would. One year, the king imposes a poll tax. Everyone over a certain age must pay the same amount. It is deeply unpopular. Peasants across the land rebel. They gather with pitchforks and axes, march on the capital, and demand the abolition of serfdom and the end of arbitrary taxes. The king meets with them, promises reforms, then reneges and hunts down the leaders. The poll tax remains. You pay it, grumbling, because you have no choice. You also pay the corvée, a labor tax, requiring you to work on the Lord's roads for a certain number of days each year. You pay the merchant, a fine paid by fathers when their daughters marry out of the manor. You pay the relief, a fee paid when you inherit property. The list seems endless. Despite the burden, taxes fund things you need: roads, bridges, walls, soldiers. Tithes support the poor, at least in theory. You have seen the church distribute bread to beggars, albeit with a sermon attached. You have also seen the Lord's coffers filled with coins from tallage. You wonder how many of your pennies went into his new hunting lodge. You cope by keeping meticulous records. You know exactly how many bushels of wheat you owe, how many eggs, how many coins. You hide a few pennies under the hearthstone for emergencies. When the collector comes, you hand over what is required and not a penny more. You also quietly join others in cursing the taxman under your breath. It is a small act of rebellion, but it feels good. Crime in your village is not rampant, but it is inevitable. Poverty leads some to steal. Hunger leads some to poach. Drunkenness leads to brawls. The law responds with a mix of severity and spectacle. The stocks stand in the village square. They consist of wooden planks with holes for the neck and wrists. Offenders are locked in and left there for hours, sometimes days. People throw rotten fruit or dung at them. Children laugh. The stocks humiliate more than hurt. The pillory is similar but elevates the offender for all to see. Flogging is common. For stealing a loaf of bread, you might receive 20 lashes on your bare back. For a second offense, the punishment might be branding. The brand marks you as a thief, making it harder to find work. For a third offense, the penalty could be death. Poaching is seen as a serious crime because it threatens the Lord's resources. Deer and boar belong to the nobility. If you are caught snaffling a rabbit in the royal forest, you risk losing your hand. If you kill a deer, you risk hanging. In one infamous case, a group of hungry men set traps in the woods and caught a stag. They were discovered. 2 were hanged. 1 had his ears cut off. The village mourned them quietly. A local priest preached about the sin of hunger. You and others nodded, understanding that sometimes sin is forced upon you by circumstance. You continue to set snares for rabbits, on your own land, of course. There are also laws about cutting down trees without permission, stealing firewood, damaging hedges, and picking your neighbor's apples. Each transgression carries a fine or punishment. You once plucked a handful of cherries from an overhanging branch. The owner saw you and took you to court. You argued that the branch extended over the public road. The bailiff ruled in your favor this time. You learned to ask before picking in the future. Justice can be arbitrary. It depends on who you offend and who hears your case. You also learned that the best way to avoid punishment is to stay in your neighbor's good graces. share your surplus apples, and he might overlook a missing cherry. As the candle burns low and the curfew bell approaches, you reflect on the labyrinth of laws that governs your life. Some of these laws are sensible responses to real dangers: fires, famine, disease. Some are mechanisms of control designed to keep you in your place and maintain the social order. Others are the product of superstition and fear. Together, they create a tapestry of regulation that touches every aspect of your existence. You have learned to navigate this tapestry with caution and humor. You have learned when to obey, when to bend, and when to quietly ignore. You have learned that the law is not infallible. It is made by people, enforced by people, and therefore flawed. You are aware that your descendants might look back on these laws with astonishment, just as you sometimes laugh at the idea of animals being put on trial. Perhaps they will have more just courts. Perhaps their laws will be written down clearly and not vary from village to village. Perhaps they will still have ridiculous regulations, laws that forbid chewing gum in public, or walking your goose on a Tuesday. Human societies always find ways to regulate behavior. The specifics change, but the impulse remains. You hope that future laws will be kinder. You also hope that future people will remember that behind every law is a person subject to it. You close your eyes and drift to sleep, grateful that for now, you have navigated another day without running afoul of the tanners, the bakers, the bailiffs, or the bishops. Tomorrow, the curfew bell will toll again, and the world of rules and loopholes will begin anew. But tonight, for a few hours, you are free. Just as there are laws governing your marriage and love life, there are laws that touch the bookends of life, birth and death. When a child is born, there is a scramble to have the infant baptized. Church law requires that babies be baptized within a few days of birth to cleanse original sin. If the child is sickly, the midwife is authorized to baptize immediately using whatever water is available, usually from the washing basin. There are instructions for emergency baptisms written in Latin and vernacular. The midwife must say the formula exactly, lest the baptism be invalid. If a baby dies unbaptized, the family believes the soul will linger in limbo. They bury the tiny body outside consecrated ground. Your neighbor lost a child last winter. The snow was deep, the priest was drunk, and the midwife mispronounced the words. The family fretted for weeks. Eventually, the priest assured them that intention mattered more than pronunciation. They breathed easier, though the mother still looks toward the sky when she hears church bells, as if listening for a baby's laugh. There are laws about who may act as a godparent. Godparents must be of good standing, must not be blood relatives, and must not be of the opposite sex if paired, to avoid potential incestuous relationships. They are expected to provide spiritual guidance and, if the parents die, to care for the child. If a godparent fails in these duties, the church can excommunicate them. You remember agreeing to be a godfather to your friend's son. You didn't think much of it until the priest called you up in church and asked you to renounce the devil on the baby's behalf. You stumbled over the Latin but managed. 4 weeks after, you had nightmares about accidentally leading the child astray. Death, too, is regulated. When someone dies, the body must be washed, wrapped in a shroud, and buried in consecrated ground. There is a fee for burial, paid to the church. There is a fee for the gravedigger. There is a fee for the bell ringer, who tolls the passing bell to alert the community. There are laws about where you may be buried. Suicide victims may not be buried in the churchyard. They are buried at a crossroads with a stake through the heart. Criminals hanged for theft may be gibbeted, hung in chains along the road, as a warning. Their bodies are left to decay in the open air. It is gruesome, but it serves as a deterrent. You once covered your child's eyes as you passed a gibbeted body. He peeked anyway. He had nightmares for days. Funeral processions must follow certain routes and may not interfere with markets or church services. There are rules about how many candles may be burned, based on the deceased's wealth. A poor man may have one candle at his head and one at his feet. A nobleman may have dozens. Professional mourners, women hired to wail and tear their hair, are regulated. Too much weeping is seen as improper. There are also laws about soul cakes, small buns given to the poor in return for prayers for the deceased. Bakers must bake them of a certain size, and may not skimp on the spices. On All Souls' Day, children go door to door singing for soul cakes. You give them apples because you cannot afford spice. They roll their eyes but accept. You believe each prayer helps your loved ones climb a rung on the ladder to heaven. The soundscape of your world is rich. Bird song at dawn, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the lilt of a ballad carried on the breeze. Music is everywhere, and, of course, there are laws about it. Minstrels, traveling musicians and storytellers, must have a license, or the patronage of a noble. Without it, they are considered vagabonds, and may be whipped or sent to the stocks. This law aims to control itinerant performers who might spread seditious songs or gossip. You remember a minstrel who passed through your village singing a song about a miller who stole grain from the poor. The reeve did not appreciate it. He ordered the minstrel to leave. The next day, half the village was humming the tune. Certain songs are banned outright. You are not allowed to sing ballads that mock the king or the church. Satirical verses about the bishop's girth are punishable. Love songs that get too suggestive may earn you a fine. One year, the town council decrees that no one may play the bagpipes after sunset. The bagpiper is outraged. He plays louder in protest. He is fined, then banned from the tavern. You buy him a mug of ale in secret and ask him to play anyway. He grins and plays softly behind the inn. The sound is haunting, like a lament carried on the night air. Theater is regulated as well. Mystery plays, dramatizations of Bible stories, are permitted on church feast days, but must adhere closely to Scripture. Actors who deviate may be censured. Morality plays that teach virtues and warn against vices are encouraged, but they must be approved by the clergy. Secular plays, especially those featuring body humor, are frowned upon. A troupe of players once performed a farce about a cheating husband in the marketplace. The wives laughed. The husbands did not. The reeve fined the troupe and confiscated their props. They left town, but not before teaching a group of young boys how to juggle. Music is also a battleground for power. The church controls much of the formal music through choirs and organists. Secular authorities control street music. Guilds control musical instruments. There is a guild for trumpeters, a guild for drummers. You cannot simply decide to be a musician. You must be apprenticed. When your daughter shows an aptitude for singing, you are both proud and worried. You want her to share her gift, but you know the risks. You teach her sacred hymns to keep her safe. She makes up her own songs anyway, about cats and rain and silly boys. You hope the law never hears them. Medieval Europe is not as insular as you might think. Traders, pilgrims, and refugees move from place to place. With them come new goods, new ideas, and new tensions. Laws treat outsiders differently. Jews, for example, are required in many places to wear distinctive badges or hats to mark them. They are often confined to certain streets. They are barred from some trades but permitted in others, like moneylending, because Christians are forbidden by the church to charge interest. This creates both reliance and resentment. You have borrowed money from a Jewish lender to buy wool. The interest is high, but you had no other option. You resent the debt, but you also appreciate the opportunity. When an edict expels Jews from the realm, you worry about how you will finance your next batch of cloth. You also worry about your Jewish neighbor Miriam who sells spices. She and her family must uproot their lives because the king needs money and sees confiscation as an expedient solution. You bake her bread for the journey and feel the injustice burn inside you. Other outsiders face similar restrictions. Lombard bankers must register with the crown and pay a fee. Traveling Romani are often banned outright, accused of sorcery and theft. Foreign merchants must unload their goods in designated areas and may not stay longer than a set number of days. They must pay higher tolls. They may not marry locals without permission. The laws are ostensibly to protect locals from being cheated, but they also serve to maintain control and extract revenue. You have met a Flemish weaver who brought new techniques. He was welcomed by the guild because his skills were valuable. You have also seen a group of Breton sailors turned away from the harbor because they lacked the proper papers. Rules are enforced selectively, often depending on who stands to gain. Xenophobia and xenophilia coexist. People are wary of outsiders, yet fascinated by their goods. You crave the salt from the Mediterranean, the silk from Byzantium, the furs from Russia. You also fear that foreigners bring disease or strange customs. Laws reflect these conflicting impulses. They restrict certain groups while granting privileges to others. They require that foreigners carry lanterns at night so locals can see them. They levy special taxes called alien subsidies. They limit property ownership. If a foreigner dies without heirs, his property reverts to the crown. You cannot help but see the injustice, but you also understand that in times of scarcity, fear breeds suspicion. You resolve to judge individuals by their actions, not by their origin. When a Spanish pilgrim stops at your stall and asks for water, you offer him a drink and ask for news of the world beyond your village. Several times a year, the monotony of daily life is broken by fairs and festivals. These events are governed by charters granted by the king or a lord. The charters specify the dates, the location, and the rules. During the fair, normal market regulations are suspended. People from far and wide come to buy, sell, and celebrate. The fair is a riot of color, noise, and smell. Jugglers toss balls near stalls selling ribbons. Bakers sell pastries dusted with sugar. Smiths display knives that gleam in the sun. You sell bolts of cloth at a stall you paid handsomely to rent. You must use the official fair weights and measures, inspected at the start of each day. If you are caught with a false scale, you lose your stall and pay a fine. You watch the wardens like a hawk. You also watch your customers, making sure they don't slip a bolt of cloth under their cloaks. The fair is not just for commerce, it is a social event. People flirt, gossip, and quarrel. There are puppet shows, dancing bears, and miracle plays. There is ale brewed stronger than usual. There are cockle-shell vendors who claim their wares have healing properties. There are charlatans selling potions that promise to cure baldness or turn base metal into gold. The law intervenes when fights break out or when a vendor is found to be cheating customers. The pillory at the fair is well used. You once saw a man locked in it with a sign that read, "This man sold rotten eggs." Children pelted him with, what else? Rotten eggs. The church takes advantage of the crowd to sell indulgences, certificates that promise to reduce the time a soul spends in purgatory. A friar stands on a barrel, waving parchment scrolls and shouting that a penny a day keeps the flames away. People line up, drop coins into a chest, and receive a slip of paper stamped with a seal. Some see this as a scam, others as an opportunity. A law requires that half the proceeds go to building a new bridge. Another law stipulates that no one may sell indulgences during Mass. You buy one when your grandmother dies, not because you fully believe in it, but because it gives you a sense of doing something for her. You also note that the friar has a fine horse. You suspect he rides it to the bank. Festivals often blend pagan and Christian traditions. May Day celebrations involve the maypole, fertility dances, and drinking. The church frowns but tolerates. The Feast of Corpus Christi includes a procession of the Blessed Sacrament and street plays depicting scenes from the Bible. The guilds each sponsor a wagon and a scene. The weavers might perform the creation of the world, complete with fake animals. The fishmongers depict Noah's Ark, splashing water on the audience. Laws govern the order of the procession, the length of the plays, and the cost of the costumes. If a scene runs long and delays the priest, the guild may be fined. You once sat through a play about the Last Judgment that lasted 3 hours. Your legs fell asleep. You still remember the devil's costume made of sheep's wool and tar. He smelled awful. As your journey through medieval laws comes to a close, you find yourself marveling at the resilience of the human spirit. People adapt, resist, bend, and sometimes break the rules imposed upon them. Laws can be tools of oppression, but they can also be instruments of fairness. Without the assize of bread, you might starve. Without regulations on building materials, your town might burn. Without the curfew, thieves might roam. At the same time, laws can be ridiculous, cruel, or self-serving. People respond with humor, ingenuity, and quiet rebellion. You have learned to weave hidden red threads into tunics, to tickle fish from the stream, to dance after curfew, to whisper songs the council would ban. Your neighbor sells love potions. Your friend smuggles extra cloth under the table. You buy indulgences with a raised eyebrow and a laugh. You also see moments of collective resistance. When taxes become unbearable, peasants gather and march. When a law targets a neighbor unjustly, you stand up for them. When a lord imposes a new fee, you find a loophole. The law is not monolithic. It is negotiated daily. Over time, some laws fade. Ordeals fall out of favor. Trial by combat disappears. Sumptuary laws become harder to enforce as trade expands and goods become cheaper. New laws arise. The Renaissance will bring statutes on printing presses, copyright, and who may translate the Bible. The Reformation will upend ecclesiastical law. The Enlightenment will introduce ideas about natural rights. You cannot foresee these changes, but you can sense that the world is not static. As you bank your fire and listen for the curfew bell, you take comfort in the knowledge that you are not alone in this dance with the law. Your ancestors navigated similar constraints. Your descendants will do the same. They will laugh at some of your laws and struggle under others of their own. They will find joy in May Day dances and frustration in taxes. They will judge pigs and possibly robots in court. They will always find ways to express their humanity within whatever legal framework surrounds them. You smile at the thought. Tomorrow you will wake, dress in wool, feed your family, pay your dues, and perhaps break a small rule for the pleasure of it. That too is part of the human story. A final word, the echo of laws. Before you drift off to sleep, consider for a moment how these medieval edicts reverberate through time. You might think that shoe-point restrictions and pig trials belong to a vanished world. Yet echoes remain. Modern fashion laws exist in dress codes and uniforms. We still tax hearths, though now we call them chimneys or carbon emissions. We still debate curfews, though we justify them with different reasons. The assize of bread lives on in food safety regulations. The prohibition of gambling echoes in gaming licenses. Even the notion of licensing minstrels has its modern counterpart in street performer permits. The absurdity of animal trials foreshadows court cases about whether an elephant can sue. The seeds planted in your era sprout in unexpected ways. Knowing this, you feel less alone. You are part of an ongoing conversation between people and their rules. Laws are not static. They evolve with needs, fears, and hopes. People push against them, and the push creates space for change. You recognize that your laughter at the court's folly is itself a form of critique. You suspect that centuries hence, people will read about your life and marvel at what you endured, and at what you accepted without question. They will laugh at the idea of a tanner being fined for working on Sunday and shake their heads at the cucking stool. They may also wonder why you tolerated hunger while deer fattened in the Lord's forest. In the end, the law is a mirror and a mold. It reflects who we are, and shapes who we become. You close your eyes and let this thought drift with you into sleep, knowing that somewhere in the future, someone is smiling at the thought of you, wrapped in wool, listening to the curfew bell.